I'm delighted to co-chair, to chair this seventh Democratizing Work webinar, which also happens to be our last for the academic year. The title is The Need for a Universal Job Guarantee, discussing the launch of the United Nations report of the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Professor Olivier De Schutter. This session is organized jointly with the Osun Economic Democracy Initiative. This workshop and Special Rapporteur De Schutter's report are keenly awaited. It's in deep synergy with the work of our Democratizing Work core groups, initiatives, and in particular, our member and expert Pavlina Tcherneva's work exploring and highlighting how a job guarantee can be central to rethinking the world of work. So for our Democratizing Work Network, this organization happens around three core principles: democratizing, decommodifying, and decarbonizing. Some would add a fourth, decolonizing, but all of this is deeply linked to the framing of this report. So the right to work is a human right. And with these powerful words, Professor De Schutter begins his compelling case for the job guarantee, not as a mere obligation of means for states to do what they can to create jobs, but as an enforceable right in which governments must provide decent work to all individuals who are both willing and able to work. And in this short introduction, he both frames the job guarantee, therefore, in legal terms and in relation to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the ILO's Employment Policy Convention of 1964, known as Convention number 122, which is also a core governance convention at the ILO, and UN Sustainable Development Goal number 8 on decent work and economic growth. And with this framing and throughout the report, Professor De Schutter also at once addresses the ways in which a job guarantee has become not only particularly compelling in the contemporary post-COVID-19 context, but also increasingly practically feasible. And this is based on examples drawn from a wide range of world regions with varying levels of development. So the careful framing also seeks to distinguish the job guarantee from what I'll refer to as the evil twin notion of workfare and similar type programs that further stigmatize the receipt of social welfare protection. So there's a lot for us to talk about. And I, for one, am particularly excited about today's session. We will hear from world-leading experts in the field. First, of course, the Special Rapporteur himself, Olivier De Schutter, who is a professor at UC Louvain and Sciences Po Paris. He has held the Special Procedures Mandate at the UN on extreme poverty and human rights since 2020. He's an expert on economic and social rights in the context of economic globalization, and indeed was formerly a member of the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights from 2015 to 2020. He was also, of course, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food from 2008 to 2014. We have two distinguished commentators on this report. The first, Jean Drèze, who is a development economist of renown, of course. He's currently visiting professor at Ranchi University in India. He has made wide-ranging contributions to development economics and public policy, particularly as concerns India. And his recent books include An Uncertain Gloria, India and Its Contradictions, written with none less than Amartya Sen, and Sense and Solidarity, Jawala Economics for Everyone. Jean is also active in various campaigns for economic and social rights, and his work, frankly, helped to design some critical social legislation in India, including the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Our second commentator is Rania Antonopoulos, who holds a PhD in economics from the New University School for Social Research. And during her tenure as alternate Minister of Labour of Greece from 2015 to 2018, under Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras' mandate, she implemented an employment guarantee program. She served as Member of Parliament and Ambassador of Greece to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And as a senior scholar, she has led a team of Levy Institute researchers studying the impact on poverty and gender equality of employment guarantee policies in South Africa, India, as well as Greece. She developed a new statistical measure of income and time poverty, which exposes the inequalities created by time deficits in household income and living standards. So I'm sure you will agree we have a most engaging panel ahead of us. So let's start first with a 20-minute presentation of the report by Olivier De Schutter, and we will encourage you all, if you can, to keep your videos on so that we can retain the seminar feel of this video conference. Of course, keep your microphones off until we turn to our Q&A period at the end. So over to you, Olivier.
Well, thank you very much, Adele, for this very useful.
I'm afraid you're muted, Olivier. That has to be said at least once in a video webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like, first of all, to thank you very much, Adele, for this very useful and generous introduction, and also express my gratitude to Jean Drèze and Rania Antonopoulos for having agreed to comment on the report. They are not only academics, they are also practitioners, and therefore their insights are particularly welcome to complement my own understanding of the issues as expressed in the report I'm presenting in just a few days to the United Nations Human Rights Council. I also would like to express my gratitude to Isabel Ferreras for having taken the initiative of inviting me to this series, and of course to Henriette Lelouan, whose contribution is really essential in allowing this to take place. Now, as Adele, you rightly noted, the right to work is a human right. But in the way the right to work is described in international human rights law, it still corresponds to an obligation of means of the government, not an obligation of result. And it is therefore not an enforceable right. Article 6 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights refers to the right to work. ILO Convention number 122, the Employment Policy Convention of 1964, refers to a duty of governments to adopt an active policy designed to promote full, productive, and freely chosen employment. And of course, SDG number 8 refers to, as one of its targets, full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men. But none of these recognize a duty of governments to provide work to those who seek to work and can find no employment. And so the report is really whether we should move from an obligation of means to an obligation of result, whether we should ensure that the right to work becomes an enforceable right, allowing to claim a right to be provided with a job on public works programs. Now, to examine this issue, I tried to follow the suggestion of my dear friend Gaëtan Van Lokeren, who suggested I should prepare a report on this topic by noting that this is an area in which the North could learn from the South, in which rich countries, OECD countries, could learn from experiences in countries such as India, Ethiopia, South Africa, for example. And yes, there is a history behind public works programs and the job guarantee that, for example, includes a very important chapter under the New Deal of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s, when the Works Progress Administration developed a series of public works programs. But today, the most extraordinary and large-scale experiments are being led in countries such as India, with the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act launched in 2005, with the Productive Safety Net program in Ethiopia, with the expanded public works program, and now the South African presidential stimulus in South Africa, or in Argentina's Jefes y Jefas de Hogar, launched in 2002 as a result of the economic crisis that the country was facing. In France, ATD Fourth World, which is the NGO that in the French-speaking world works most closely with people in deep poverty, has launched Territoire Zéro Chômeur Longue Durée, territories without long-term unemployed, that also covers now 60 municipalities and seeks to show that it is workable to provide a job guarantee in the French context. So against this background, what does the report try to achieve? Well, first of all, the report points at what it calls the global employment paradox. And the paradox is the following. On the one hand, we still have large-scale underemployment. Now, it's true that the world is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, and the global figures of unemployment have been improving significantly over the past couple of years. In fact, the ILO projects that in 2023, global unemployment will fall below the pre-pandemic levels at around 191 million people, which is an average unemployment rate globally of 5.3%. But the recovery is not shared equally across all regions. It is expected that in 2023, in North Africa, 11.2% of the workforce will be unemployed. In sub-Saharan Africa, it will be 6.3%. In the Arab countries, it will be 9.3%. In other terms, the recovery is still uneven. Moreover, beyond these official unemployment figures, we have many people who are unemployed or underemployed who do not appear in statistics because they are not looking actively for a job anymore. They are discouraged, or they cannot find child facilities providing childcare, and therefore are not looking for a job as a result, and they disappear from global statistics despite these people needing jobs in order to improve their standards of living. It's also important to acknowledge that whilst economic growth is regaining strength, that alone will not suffice. Much of the growth today is the result of technological advances, including artificial intelligence and automation, which in fact may result in strong growth going hand in hand with net job losses. And of course, we know that unemployment significantly increases the risks of poverty. Globally, only about 20% of people who are unemployed receive cash benefits. Even in high-income countries, only about 52% of people without employment receive cash benefits. And in low-income countries, the share is much lower even of those unemployed receiving compensation. So there is not enough employment for all. And we know that in the next few years, there will be many more people seeking employment, particularly in developing countries. It is expected that an additional 470 million people will be seeking work in developing countries by the year 2035. So that is, on the one hand, what we have. That is the current situation. On the other hand, we realize that important societal needs are not being met. There's not enough employment created, but there is no shortage of work to be done. The greening of the economy and the growing care economy, care to dependent persons, education, healthcare, will require substantial workforce in the future. In a report I presented to the General Assembly in October 2020, I tried to show that in order to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement on climate change and the biodiversity targets, and in order to provide care to those who need support, early childhood, older persons, many more jobs will have to be created. In fact, the ILO estimates that the health, education, and care capacity needed to meet the Sustainable Development Goals in 45 countries, representing in total some 60% of the global population, will require 117 million additional jobs. And so that is the global employment paradox. Structural unemployment and underemployment on the one hand, and on the other hand, societal needs that remain unsatisfied, and the need to create jobs in certain sectors that for the moment are undersupplied. And so looking at the national experiences we could document, learning from those experiences, and trying to address this paradox, the report tries to highlight a series of benefits from the introduction of job guarantee programs. And let me just list perhaps the 6 or 7 most important contributions such job guarantee programs can provide. First, of course, access to decent work supports social inclusion, allowing individuals to gain self-confidence and a sense of purpose. Secondly, an employment guarantee scheme raises the bar of labor standards across the whole economy by giving precarious workers a fallback option, strengthening their bargaining position. In other terms, these workers may find it easier to refuse jobs that do not provide a decent wage or decent working conditions, given that they have the option of seeking a public job in those job guarantee programs. Thirdly, a job guarantee scheme provides an opportunity for participants in the scheme to build skills, receive training, thus improving their prospects to find a job after leaving the program, and maybe starting successful businesses. And we have examples of this in countries such as Ethiopia or South Africa. Fourth, the job guarantee can ensure the integration of those that today are most disadvantaged in the labor market, including those that are displaced by technological developments and the decarbonization of the economy, persons with disabilities, women, ethnic minorities, the long-term unemployed, all categories of workers who face discrimination in the employment market, and could allow these groups an improved participation in the employment market. And some programs are tailored for this to be a positive outcome. For example, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in India that was proposed and advocated for by Jean Drèze has quotas for women and childcare services at the site of employment in order to encourage women to benefit from the program. Public works programs can also break down gender stereotypes. For example, by training women into jobs that are traditionally male jobs, such as in the construction sector, or by drawing more men into the care sector. So that is a fourth important contribution of job guarantee programs. A fifth contribution is that the participants in such programs can build assets and provide goods and services that are undersupplied by the markets, either because they're public goods that everyone benefits from, but that no one wishes to pay for, or because the services in question benefit primarily low-income households, people who have no ability to pay for these services, despite the very important positive externalities from such services being provided. For example, in early childhood education and care, or for support to older persons. In other terms, the job guarantee programs can create public goods and services that have huge positive externalities for society as a whole, but will be undersupplied by the market if left to private sector mechanisms. Sixth, the job guarantee program ensures that in times of economic downturn, and in order to support a transition to private sector and other jobs in times of growth, an employment guarantee will be an automatic stabilizer for the economy, allowing to mitigate the impacts of economic shocks. Seventh, the job guarantee can improve resilience to shocks, contribute to social stability by protecting household incomes, ensuring, for example, that households will not have to sell assets in times of crisis because they will have this income security provided to them by the ability for these households to have access to a job. Finally, whether projects to be supported by public employment schemes are identified by the communities of users, this can strengthen local democracy and civic participation, like in public budgeting programs where communities choose which projects should be supported by the job guarantee program. It can be very empowering for local communities and can strengthen local democracy. Now, the report highlights a number of choices that should be made in designing the job guarantee based on the experiences of countries such as South Africa, Argentina, India, or others. I have no time here to go through the different variations and models of these job guarantee programs, but I would like to highlight some concerns that have been expressed around the implementation of these programs. And I'd like to, in particular, highlight 3 risks that have been identified in the design and implementation of these programs. Firstly, and I believe very importantly for us, fears have been expressed that the introduction of a job guarantee program will accompany a shift from welfare to workfare. After all, once you provide support to households by ensuring that they have access to work if they seek to work against, for example, a minimum wage, it may be tempting to reduce social protection benefits or to make access to social protection conditional upon accepting to take a job. And we already see governments increasingly tempted to make access to social protection conditional upon following certain training programs or indeed accepting some forms of employment, provided the employment is reasonably related to the qualifications of the worker. That, of course, should not be allowed to happen. And the report, I believe, is very clear that the introduction of job guarantee programs should not be used as a pretext to impose a retrogression in social protection or to make access to social protection conditional upon accepting a job. And that is the first warning I would like to address, and the first risk we should be aware exists with the introduction of a job guarantee program. The second risk is, of course, that it can be costly to introduce a job guarantee program. There are many debates about how the cost-benefit analysis of job guarantee programs should be conducted. What I would like to highlight here is that beyond the fact that in countries where people who are unemployed receive certain unemployment benefits that, of course, will not have to be paid anymore once people take up jobs that are remunerated. There are many costs to unemployment that may be difficult to quantify, but that are hugely important and should be computed in providing this cost-benefit analysis. Shorter lives, the psychological distress of people who are long-term unemployed, the poor health impacts, including depression and anxiety, the reduced future employability of long-term unemployed people who, as we know, are discriminated against in their access to employment if their period of unemployment lasts for a long period of time, and in general, the knock-on effects on families or communities of long-term unemployment should be taken into account. And in the assessment of a program such as Territoire Zéro Chômeur Longue Durée in France, for example, there are many debates as to the cost-benefit analysis of this program. Certain orthodox economists only look at the budgetary consequences of financing those jobs that they compare with what it costs to pay unemployment benefits, but that of course misses part of the picture and what I would argue may be the most important part of the picture, which is the social cohesion and the gains in terms of well-being for those benefiting from the program. My third consideration is that, of course, in the implementation of job guarantee programs, there are risks of corruption and discrimination. And the public funds dedicated to these programs may be misused at local level in some cases, and I received many reports to that effect. This is why a rights-based approach is important to ensure that the program is implemented without discrimination, without leakage, without corruption, in a way that is transparent, that is controlled by the local community, including by community social audits, as is practiced, for example, in countries such as India, and that people who could benefit from the program are adequately informed about the program itself and about their rights under the program. A rights-based approach to the design and implementation of the job guarantee seems to me essential if we want it to reach people in poverty, if we want it to be making a serious contribution to the reduction of poverty, and if we want this to contribute ultimately to the right to work becoming an enforceable human right. With this, I would like to thank all of you for your participation in this discussion. I very much look forward to our discussion, and am particularly eager to listen to my very dear friends, Rania Antonopoulos and Jean Drèze.
Thank you so much for a really very clear and compelling overview that follows the arguments of the report very closely, and it reminds in your reminder of the psychological dimensions of the job guarantee, the words of the Canadian Supreme Court Chief Justice Brian Dixon on work as just so fundamental in the psychological and well-being of workers. That point comes across particularly strongly as a distinguishing feature from other forms of measures to supplement income without the job component. So thank you very much for that. I'm delighted now to turn over to our distinguished commentators. So we'll start with Jean Drèze. Jean, you have 12 minutes, and I will give a prompt when we are 2 minutes out. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele. Let me start by congratulating Olivier and his team, because I'm sure there was a team with him, for this wonderful report on a tremendously important subject. It's a very comprehensive and persuasive report. Your presentation itself, I think, was very well articulated. I think you have made the case for employment guarantee very persuasively, and you have also in the report included a lot of interesting evidence that further strengthens that case. The job guarantee, I think, is a very important issue for anyone who is interested in democratizing work, not only because the job guarantee itself can be based on democratic principles. That was certainly the idea and the effort in India. It has been partly defeated in recent years because of growing centralization of the program, but it was very much part of the initial idea that it would be a program of the people, for the people, by the people, where the workers are not just doing the work, but they're also planning the works, doing the work, monitoring the works, evaluating and auditing the works. But there is another connection, which I think is even more important, which is that if we want to democratize the workplace, then people must have an unconditional alternative to exploitative employment. And unemployment benefits are not an unconditional alternative. They are conditional on seeking work, which normally would mean seeking work in an exploitative workplace, because that's what most workplaces are. So it doesn't serve that purpose, whereas a job guarantee can serve that purpose. A universal basic income possibly could also serve that purpose, but that is not our topic today. And I think a job guarantee is much more feasible than a universal basic income. Now, I have one minor disappointment with the report, and it is that I feel that the conclusions could have been stronger. I feel that after all these arguments and all these evidence, Olivier, you can be more assertive. I mean, it's true, it's very important, the statement you have made, that employment guarantee can work and can have many benefits. I think that is certainly an important statement in itself. But I think we can say more. We can say that employment guarantee has proved its mettle in various countries, and that there's a strong case for moving forward in some fashion. That doesn't mean necessarily recommending an employment guarantee law in any specific country, but I think I think within the limits of your capacity as a rapporteur, because I presume there may be limits, I think you can be more assertive, and I'm hoping that on the 30th of June, you will make a somewhat stronger statement about the fact that we really have good reasons to move forward in some fashion, not just in poor countries, but also in the richer countries. I think the employment guarantee actually is far more important for poor countries because these countries don't have unemployment benefits and don't have major cash transfer schemes by and large. But I think that the employment guarantee is also important for rich countries, and in many ways could be easier to implement in the richer countries. I'll come back to that at the end if I have time. Now, when I say that the employment guarantee has proved its mettle, I think that is where the Indian experience in particular is so important, because the Indian program, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in India, has shown the feasibility, affordability, and sustainability of a full-fledged employment guarantee over a long period of time. It's already almost 20 years now since the law came into effect. And when I say full-fledged employment guarantee, what I mean is firstly that it's a legal guarantee and that it is universal and unconditional. Anyone who demands work has a right to be employed within 15 days on local public works. That's basically what the law says. This is the most important entitlement under the law. The only restriction is that it's in rural areas and not in urban areas. There's also a restriction of 100 days per household per year, but that's not necessarily an important constraint because in any case, most people have some employment for other times. Now, of course, the implementation of this law has been far from perfect. I think you are well aware of that. So it's not like the moment the law is in place, it will be an actual employment guarantee. Even today, people still have to fight for their rights at every step, whether it is the right for work on demand, whether it is the right for the minimum wage, or payment within 15 days and so on. But at least they have something to fight for. And all said and done, the law, the Employment Guarantee Act in India, employs about 10 million people on an average day. It's a massive employment program. Nothing like that has ever happened, so far as I know, in history. Furthermore, it's not just the size of the program. I think all the arguments you have made in your reports about the benefits of employment guarantee have been shown in practice in India, whether it is the effect on poverty, whether it is social inclusion, whether it is the gender aspect. You refer to the job quota for women, but actually the participation of women in this program is much higher than the quota. The quota is actually irrelevant. The quota is 1/3. But in practice, the majority of workers are women, and in some states, 80 or 90% of the workers are women. This is of enormous importance in a country where women's workforce participation is among the lowest in the world. Similarly, you have mentioned the counter-cyclical effects. We have seen that very clearly during the COVID crisis, when the employment guarantee program in India by itself expanded enormously under the pressure of demand for work. You have spoken also about raising the bar of labor standards. We have seen that also. And as you said, addressing social needs and building assets. All this has been demonstrated. The only benefit that you have discussed that I don't think we have seen very much so far in India is the skill building aspect. I think that has not happened very much so far. It could happen a lot more, but it's not happened yet. I want to say a few words about the productive value of the assets that are being created under this program, because I think that's very important to answer the concern about the financial costs. Now, it's not at all the case that all the projects undertaken under the employment guarantee in India are very productive. Some of them are, some of them are not. But we know that many of them are productive and that most of them could be very productive with better planning and implementation. And I just want to give two examples very quickly. From the state of Jharkhand.
You are at your 2 minutes.
2 minutes, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then I'll skip that. I'll just give very briefly that even in the state of Jharkhand, where I live, which is one of the states where the implementation is worst in the country, even there are some wonderfully productive projects under the Employment Guarantee Act, like the digging of wells and the mango plantations. I mean, these projects have higher rates of return, even in plain financial terms, than most industrial projects. So that's important to say, because if these projects are a good investment, then the costs become much less of an issue, obviously. Finally, in the little minute that I have left, the cost now, in India, the cost has varied between about 0.5% and 1% of GDP. That, of course, is very affordable, even for India. I used to think that in rich countries, it would be much more expensive because the wages are so much higher. But that's not correct, because if you look at wages as a ratio of per capita GDP, it's almost the same in India as in Belgium or France or Germany. So what it means is that the rich countries with the same expenditure as a proportion of GDP, something between 0.5% and 1%, could do at least as well as India has done. Furthermore, if you look at the real costs and not just the financial costs, they will be much lower in the rich countries because the rich countries pay unemployment benefits. And the unemployment benefits sometimes are as high as 70% of the minimum wage. So why not pay the extra 30% and have people do something useful that gives them satisfaction and has all the benefits that you have described. So coming back to my main point about the report, I think we have to be more assertive. We have to say there are not only all these good arguments, but also a lot of positive experience. And the time has come to take this idea forward and to go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for those prescient and very helpful comments. Now I'm delighted to turn over to Rania Antonopoulos. And likewise, I'll give you a 2-minute warning. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone, and in particular, Olivier and all the folks at Democratizing Work, both for inviting me, but primarily for taking on this extremely important issue, which is the right to work. I know that it is one of the principles, of the 3 principles that you have been working on, and also I know from a few discussions with Olivier what his personal views are, but the amazing and impressive thing that Olivier has managed to do is to put it squarely in an institutional framework that has not really been preoccupied with the connection between poverty and work for paid work, because of course we have unpaid work, but that's a different topic. So the revolutionary thing that the report has accomplished is to bring to the fore something that we all know as worldwide, but also I'll borrow some statistics from my own country, Greece, my home country, where you will see, of course, people that are living in poverty and have a job, but statistically speaking, that's about 21 to 22%, which is very high already. When you look at the numbers for people that are unemployed, that goes to 70%. 70% of the unemployed in Greece are below the poverty line. So the connection that is almost evident, as the majority of the people, both in developing and developed countries, survive on the basis of some job that they are holding. Now, the report is fantastic in bringing together a lot of issues in a very short period. You only have some 50 pages or so, Olivier, to put it all together. So it is very rich. The text is very rich. It is compact, really. And the starting point, of course, for all of us that are discussing these issues is to think as to why we need this issue of job guarantee as a right. And my suggestion to that is that whether you look at developing countries or developed countries, the needs of those that provide employment, that want to hire, and the needs of those that want to and need to work in order to survive, that need a job, have no coordination mechanism whatsoever. Employers do not hire because somebody needs to work. They have their own motivations. And we will not go into their motivations and their standards of employment and so on and so forth. But there is absolutely no need for these two needs to match. So the question, of course, arises, as we have underemployment, unemployment, people looking for work and not being able to find it, what might the response be? And it has been said earlier by Jean. Jean said that it is a lot more important, such an initiative in developing countries. I agree very much with him. But despite the differences between developed and developing countries, I have to say that developed countries are equally in need of such guarantees, such rights that we are here discussing. And I'll give a quick example of Greece that connects to the counter-cyclical automatic stabilizer that Olivier alluded to earlier and has in his report. In 2010, in Greece, there were 375,000 people that were unemployed. The unemployment rate was about 7.5%. Because of the austerity measures, Greece, as you may know, went through, I'll put it in quotation marks, bankruptcy, but the medicine that was delivered by the financial institutions, international financial institutions, resulted in extreme outcomes, such as increases in the unemployment rate from 7.5% to 27.5%. We went from 375,000 people being unemployed to 1,375,000 in a matter of 3 years. With internal devaluations, so wages were mandated to decline. Government spending was mandated to decline severely. And of course, a lot of selling off of public assets and all of what countries go through when they are under supervision from the IFIs. So in that context, in the context of the financial crisis, in the context of any severe change that happens in the economy, we need to be prepared. You cannot have one-off initiatives if you do not have the institutional structure and if you do not have the guarantee. Then many issues of implementation, of design, of corruption arise. So the permanency and the advocacy for having such a policy as part of what governs our well-being, our social cohesion is extremely important. And I think the report does a fantastic job in bringing that up. Now, I would like to say that the paradox that you are referring to, here I would like to caution us a little bit, because countries are at different levels of development. If one says that there are many unfulfilled social needs, then the question arises, are these needs to be covered by an employment guarantee, by a job guarantee program, or by expanding the public sector? It is clear that the private sector is not going to do it. It is not profitable enough. So I think we have to engage around that with trade unions, public sector trade unions. In the case of Greece, where, as you heard in the very kind introduction to earlier, in the case of Greece, in fact, the program was designed together with the Trade Union Confederation. When my home institution in the United States, the Levy Economics Institute, where Pavlina actually is a member of, when we started this work in 2008, in fact, prior to the crisis, the idea was to work together with constituencies that should take it on. This cannot be the work of an institute. This cannot be the work of an individual. So who are, I don't like the word stakeholders that much, but who are the people that have an interest in seeing that change comes about? Who are the defenders of those that are looking for work and cannot find one? So it was the combined effort of trade unions, civil society mobilization, and of course, a lot of analytical work that took place at the Levy Institute. And there is a study that I have shared with the folks that invited me, and we could provide a link if you are interested in looking at the details. I want to comment also, in my sporadic comments here and there, I want to comment also on the issue of universal versus targeted. In my humble view, what is important above all is that something that you mentioned, Olivier, is that the participation is optional, is voluntary. Whether it is universal or targeted, of course, universal access would be fantastic, but many countries will need to go through progressive realization of such a right. You do not have actually the means to suddenly employ 1 million people. You cannot even devise the proper work. So you will need to gradually engage with the implementation. But the voluntary aspect is extremely important, precisely because you want to avoid the workfare. So what do? We did that in Greece. You legislate that all other social protection measures stay in place. For us, in the law that we passed, even unemployment benefits stay the same. And if you are unemployed and you participate in this program, then there is a top-up to the unemployment benefit. But anytime you want to exit and go back to the unemployment benefit, you can do that, including the minimum income guarantee. And here I want to devote a little bit of time in saying the following. Voluntary participation, key. When we implemented the program, which reached 200,000 people, not enough, but that's what we could accomplish at the time, with a lot of pressure from especially the IMF, that did not want to see the program being implemented. But in any event, what we did was to invite the ILO to examine the design of the Ministry of Labor, the implementation, and to write a report with recommendations. So part of the outcome, and this is why I wanted to share these slides with all the participants today, part of the work that the ILO did was a qualitative study that asked both the participants, but also the communities that the participants were working in, what they thought and how important was the program and why did they participate. So one of the findings was that people were leaving the minimum income guarantee program to enter the job guarantee program. And when they were asked, why did you do that? They said, because we want to feel useful, we want to contribute, and we want to be in the camaraderie of other people contributing to our community. And this was overwhelmingly the case. On the other hand, the community, for example, you will see one slide where there was a small physical infrastructure project. They were paving some pavements to a school so that it provided safe access of children and their parents to the school. And people come out of the balconies, clapping and congratulating the folks that were part of the job guarantee program. So The
We'll leave
issues
you
of
2
design,
minutes.
thank you. The issues of design really can be solved. It will not be perfect, but they can be solved. What's important, and I hope that this is going to evolve stronger over time, is the issues of mobilization and the persuading of the powers to be that we need to move in that direction. Thank you again for this opportunity, and thank you for this excellent report, Olivier.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Rania, for those comments. And I'm struck by the powerful example you provided in relation to how we should think about local democracy and civic participation, a theme raised in the report, and your experience and examples, I think, really effectively underscore the who should be involved in the how. So this is a wonderful time to turn back to you, Olivier, to ask you if you have a reaction to the 2 comments. And you have 5 minutes.
Many thanks again, Adele. And let me be very, very brief in reaction to what I heard from Jean-Dres and Rania Antonopoulos, not least because I really would like to have enough time for the question and answer session. In the consultations that led to this report being written, there were two concerns that were mostly expressed, quite beyond the macroeconomic considerations already discussed and the cost of implementing such a job guarantee program. And the 2 concerns came, on the one hand, from proponents of the universal basic income, who defend the idea that we should move away from a work-centered society, and that in order to respect the life choices of each individual and to encourage, therefore, pluralism in society rather than treat all people as potential workers, universal basic income was the right direction in which to go. And I mentioned this because Jean, in his comments, referred to UBI. Now, I personally do not see the 2 projects as contradictory. I think the 2 can both coexist, both in each in their own way decommodify work by essentially refusing to make support to individuals' access to a decent standard of living conditional upon taking up work, and B, providing the individual with more options. And some people, in part for the reasons that Rania referred to at the end of her presentation, may prefer to work because they prefer to be useful, they prefer to contribute to the community, they like the social integration that work allows, and yes, the acquisition of skills and the possibility of graduating from the program with higher chances of finding employment as a result of those skills being acquired. So some people may prefer to work even at a wage that is relatively low in comparison to their qualifications. But that was one set of critiques, and I would be most interested if in the Q&A session we could explore in greater detail whether these 2 options are contradictory or instead, as I believe, complementary. The other critique came from unions or people linked to the unions movement, who indeed expressed 2 fears. One, that we would move from welfare to workfare with the introduction of a job guarantee program. And here, of course, the answers are first that in many countries, a large part of the population has neither social protection nor a guaranteed job. So it is clear that in many low-income countries in particular, it is one improvement in social protection to also provide social protection in the form of a guaranteed employment for those who are willing to take up work. And the second response is that the job guarantee program should not lead to reduce other forms of social protection or impose increased conditionalities. That is indeed one strong message of the report I present. But Rania presents us with the second argument that came from unions from the public sector, who may be saying quite understandably that the job guarantee program leads to compete with workers in the public sector because the participants in such job guarantee programs may not have the same set of guarantees as the workers in the public sector, and the bargaining position of these workers may be weakened as a result of there being a program allowing the government to recruit people on a short-term basis to contribute to public works in times of economic downturn. So we may have a trade-off here between preserving the public sector jobs from that form of competition and that form of fragilization on the one hand, and on the other hand, the ability for the government to respond to economic downturns by programs that can allow a very swift increase of the workforce recruited to perform public works useful to the community, with the understanding that the people recruited under these programs will graduate after a few months or perhaps a couple of years from these programs, and that in times of economic boom, those jobs can diminish in numbers. So I think that is an important debate to be had. If we want the job guarantee program to have this function as an economic stabilizer, we have to accept that kind of flexibility embedded into the program. But of course, the conditions of work, the wages, the status of these workers should be designed with the unions to ensure that this does not result in unfair competition. Just like it should not result in unfair competition with the private sector. If some workers are paid a relatively low wage on public works programs that may compete with private companies who may be, awarded public contracts to do the same thing, paying higher wages. And so it's important to ensure that the wages are set in ways that do not create that kind of distortion. These are some of the issues that the report tries to look at, but there are certainly many questions that remain open and that would benefit from more work being done along those lines. Many thanks. I look forward to our Q&A session.
Brilliant. That's very helpful indeed. And I think we'll turn now to the audience that has been listening intently for the past hour. We would love to hear your comments or questions. I'll encourage you to use the Zoom hand symbol to indicate that you would like to ask a question, and please do not be shy. We're looking forward to a healthy, fulsome discussion of the many issues that are now on the table. You may also use the chat function, I believe, if that is enabled, to start us off. And perhaps to galvanize. Yes? Okay, lovely. I see Hiba Hafiz. Please go right ahead.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation. It's such important work. My question is about whether any of the commentators have any thoughts about the Biden administration's focus on infrastructure development and the use of contracting with private actors as kind of a substitute for a public job guarantee. And what the relationship between, contracting with private actors and a public job guarantee, how to kind of think through and resolve some of the tensions that creates as a matter of public policy.
Thank you. Excellent question. Who would like to respond? Olivier, should we turn first to you?
Well, I'm not familiar with the details of how the Biden administration intends to implement its plans to green the economy, because that is what essentially the program is about. I think it's an important question to be asked, how the job guarantee programs we see develop across the world relate to the private sector, including the private sector that may be awarded public contracts. We have, on the one hand, some programs that seek to avoid any form of competition. So, for example, in France, Territoire Zéro Chômeur Longue Durée is designed to avoid any competition with the private sector in the particular localities where the program is deployed. A dialogue takes place with the private sector to ensure that the jobs that will be created will not compete with the private sector. On the other hand, that form of competition may be a healthy one if the job guarantee program raises the bar, forcing employers from the private sector to treat workers better, to pay better wages, including in countries where the minimum wage is routinely flouted, to pay at least the minimum wage, or indeed to pay a decent wage corresponding to the qualification of the workers if the job guarantee program provides a higher wage to strengthen the bargaining position of workers. So the models are different with respect to precisely this question that Hiba Hafiz raises, which is how the job guarantee programs relate to the private sector. And I think all we can say is that there is no probably universal recipe, and the report tries to show instead the diversity of the models that could be used. What all these models, however, have in common is the need to strengthen the bargaining position of workers by providing them this fallback option with the use of public funds. But that is all I have to say. I'm afraid I don't know the details of what the Biden administration is implementing today.
Thank you, Olivier. Jean or Anya, would you like to add anything? Okay. If not, I will turn to the second question. So Anna Oliveira, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So my question is, considering that people would have, I understand the idea that if people have jobs like that are guaranteed, maybe the other jobs would be better. But what could we do, or how can we prevent those guaranteed jobs from being jobs that are not interesting, fulfilling, that people are not motivated to do? Like stress in the workplace, and how can we guarantee that it's not going to be a sort of situation where people have to work because that's the only source of basic income they would have, like versus a universal basic income guarantee, and that they would not be exploited you know, in certain tasks that most people would not like to do. And given that their only choice would be to keep those jobs, I imagine that if they should decide to quit, they would not be protected. I compare that with, for example, what happened in Canada during COVID times, where you would get help from the government if you lost your job, but you did not have the choice to get that same help if you decided to quit your job for any given reason, like you don't like it, you're not well treated, you're stressed, you're struggling. So how do we guarantee that those jobs will be respectful and motivating and interesting for every person?
Thank you for that question. I wonder if one of our commentators might want to take that question. Please feel free to jump in, Rania or Jean.
I can answer the question with reference to India, if it's helpful. So in India, the jobs under the Employment Guarantee Act are not great. I mean, it's basically a lot of digging, kind of hard work, not very highly paid. It's the minimum wage, but it's a lot better than the kinds of jobs that the same people can get in the private sector. And partly because there are norms. I mean, there are norms for work hours, there are norms for productivity. You know, there's a certain amount you have to do in a day, not more than that. There are provisions, at least in the law, for creches for children if there are women at the work site. There are norms for supervision and so on, and for payment within 15 days. So it's because of these norms being in place that a lot of people, and especially women, much prefer these jobs to being casual workers on the market. Just to give you another example, I mean, sexual harassment, it doesn't seem to be much of a problem at these work sites because they're public work sites, they are monitored, people come in large groups and so on. In the private work sites, sexual harassment of women is rampant. And that's one reason, among others, why the participation of women is so high. So I think over time, one can hope that the conditions will improve more, and in particular that the work will perhaps be more satisfying, more creative, and so on and so forth. But I think at least it's moving in the right direction, and there are some basic safeguards. So I think from the point of view of your concern, the job guarantee is actually a step forward.
Very interesting, important to underscore the strength of the regulatory environment that surrounds the guarantee. Are there other comments? Yes, go right ahead, Rania.
Thanks much. So I'll take the opportunity to address two things at the same time. My first comment to the last question is that a job guarantee program is not for everybody. It is optional. It is once okay, a lot depends, of course, on the design. So in the case of Greece, we have community participation and trade unions and municipalities deciding on the projects. The projects have very specific occupational and work requirements. These are announced. People apply for these jobs through an extremely transparent, I'm very proud of that actually, process. And therefore jobs get allocated. So in Greece, for every job that was announced, there were 10 to 15 people that wanted that job. So we had to exclude actually people from participating. Now, out of the 1,300,000 more or less people, those that applied were close to 400 to 500,000. So that means that half of the unemployed were not interested. So that's part one of my answer as to how do we guarantee that the jobs are interesting. Maybe they are, maybe they are not. There are many different considerations that one has in wanting to participate in work. Now, I'll give you a quick example. One of the areas of project development where forest management and use of products from forests were once a week, there were seminars about environmental sustainability interventions. And 1 day per week, we also provided seminars on how to build social and solidarity enterprises, entities that produce, in other words, workers' cooperatives. So depending on the location and on the interests of people, we had architects actually that were unemployed for 3 years, changing jobs. So the design of the projects is extremely important. In that design, to come back to Olivier's question about the trade unions, the first problem you alluded to that trade unions raise as a concern, which has to do with whether this job guarantee jobs provide the same legal rights and guarantees, or do you create a dual market? You know, some people get paid better, have social security, have vacation time, and so on. My answer is that in countries such as Greece, you legislate and you have exactly identical rights, including maternity leave and everything else. On the second concern, which is, are these workers cheaply replacing what should be, properly speaking, public services, public goods provisioning? That's where I think it was extremely important to work closely with trade unions so we could identify those areas and stay away from them. So there was an agreement on areas, much like what you said, Olivier, in France, how you avoid competing with the private sector. So the whole effort from the very beginning was to get labor unions aboard and therefore listen very carefully to the latter concern. There can be, through conversations and communication, it can happen. Greece is one example.
Extremely helpful. Thank you for that clarification. And it sounds like moving really towards a meaningful consultation-based model and where the
Yes.
quality is crucial. I'm going to turn, we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to turn to one of the questions that's been in the chat for a while. It's from Jonathan Kronk. Do you know of any court cases globally establishing anything close to an obligation of a government to provide a job to the unemployed? I imagine there's a response. Please feel free to step in, any of our. Olivier?
No, I would say very briefly that in the corpus of international human rights, there is a non-discrimination requirement that, as regards access to employment, translates into a norm of meritocracy. And human rights bodies, monitoring bodies, have systematically insisted that the right to work, although not being enforceable, at the very least should translate into a requirement of non-discrimination. That often is seen as one has a job if one has, the competences, the qualifications required. I strongly oppose this. I believe that if the norms of merit, of qualification come from the market, they should be questioned because they may be having exclusionary effects. And so the limited extent to which there is a right to work in international human rights law that is enforceable, it is to ensure that the norms of meritocracy do not lead some categories of potential workers to be permanently excluded or excluded on the long term from the employment market because they do not correspond to the received understanding of merit. That is all we have. But if we understand this, we already move further towards decommodifying work than in a purely meritocracy-based understanding of the employment relationship.
Extremely interesting. That framing itself seems at odds with the increased reliance on supervisory bodies on a notion of substantive equality, which is, of course, an anti-exclusionary approach to thinking about access to things such as employment. So it would be very interesting to have that developed further, Olivier. Thank you. Would either of the other commentators like to step in on this point? Yes, Jean, go right ahead.
So once again, I can add something with reference to India. I'm sorry, it's the only country I know much about. I think it was an interesting question about whether there are court cases. So in India, the employment guarantee is a legal guarantee, so it's justiciable. All the rights in the law, not just the right to work on demand, but the right to minimum wage, payment within 15 days, work site facilities, all these are justiciable rights. So in principle, anyone can go to court to enforce these rights if necessary. The interesting thing is that this has hardly ever happened, which is not necessarily wrong. I mean, most laws are not enforced by the courts, they are enforced by the society and the government and so on, and the people. But still, I think in the case of this employment guarantee, where we know that people's rights are being violated all the time, it is striking that hardly anyone went to court. And I think the reason is very simple, that the justice system is just not accessible to these workers. I mean, the last thing they want to do is to get entangled in a court case. However, there have been some important public interest litigations in the high courts and more importantly, the Supreme Court. For example, to demand court directions for timely payment of wages. So there have been, so the short answer is yes, there have been court cases to enforce the employment guarantee, but not many in India.
Very helpful, and it's so wonderful to have such a close and deep dive into what's happening in, of course, one of the most important examples in the world.
May I?
Rania, please go right ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly.
It's interesting. In Greece, as I mentioned earlier, for every available job, there were many more applications. So there were grievances at the beginning, and then there were a couple of court cases as to why people were excluded, although there was transparency. I mean, it was not a matter of fraudulent behavior. So what that did actually was allow us to argue with the Director General for Employment, DG Employment in Europe, and ask that more funds are allocated away from wage support system to private sector, because they were not hiring, they were not being absorbed. These funds were not being absorbed. Of course, in the middle of a recession, the private sector is not hiring. So we were able to shift money, although it was not it was not fungible, so that more people could participate in the program. So in a way, people asking for their rights allowed us through the court system, allowed us, empowered us to advocate for expansion of funding.
Thank you so much. Really, really insightful. There is a healthy conversation in the chat. I think the remaining two questions have been engaged with effectively, but really turn our attention to how we might be raising the bar with inclusion of job guarantees. I'm going to turn now to David Christiansen-Gural for your question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Adele, for taking the question. And thank you, Olivia. I'm fully in support of what you're defending. And I really appreciate your clear and compelling presentation. I agree with Jean that the case ought to be made very forcefully. This is so important that we provide this support. My question is about the long-term strategy of the Democratized Work Manifesto. And I think this connects with Anna's question from the first part of the discussion. I understand that the universal job guarantee can strengthen democracy in the workplace through supporting workers to democratically unionize their workplaces because they're less worried about losing their employment. But what are the obstacles to structuring a job guarantee as a way to give workers skills in democratic participation in the workplace, with then a job ladder to join unionized worker cooperatives as they no longer need that job guarantee? In my mind, that would make it more supportive of the eventual goal of the Democratized Manifesto to fully democratize the workplace in the long run. And I understand they're doing this effectively in Reggio Emilia in Italy with type A and type B care cooperatives. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I'm curious, very curious what the, whether there's some discussion of that. And second, what are the objections to combining, you mentioned there was, you were in favor of combining a job guarantee with a universal basic income. I'm curious, what are the objections, given Ranya's important point that people often prefer paid work in certain circumstances, but in many circumstances, we know people are obligated with care responsibilities, very important, very difficult and challenging care work that's unpaid and therefore are not available to take a job guarantee. So what are the objections to combining these two programs? I'd like to know more about that. Thank you.
So a lovely set of reflections, quite large as well. I'm mindful of time, but very much would, with participants or attendees' indulgence, encourage us to take that question in part because at the end it also leads us to asking what is work and what do we do about the work of care as it is understood in our societies. What message do we send with a job guarantee? Is this an example of where the complementarity, the deep complementarity between universal basic income and job guarantee is well seen? And so you spoke to that quite compellingly, Olivier. Would you like to address this evocative question?
No, very briefly, it would require more developments, but I think the proponents of universal basic income see the job guarantee perhaps as projecting an idea about what is a desirable good life, and that is one that is productive and useful to society. When universal basic income proponents believe that true pluralism should include the possibility for individuals to choose not to work and to dedicate their lives to other projects than work. I see this as complementary because I believe that genuine freedom for the individual, the expansion, if you wish, of the capabilities of the individual should translate into a larger set of choices that the individual can make. If he or she prefers to receive a modest sum in order to dedicate him or herself to something else than what is recognized as work by society, that's fine and that's great, and that is what the universal basic income could provide. If he or she instead wishes to do something that is deemed useful to society, then he or she should have access to a job guarantee program. And if he or she wishes to do what the for-profit private sector believes the market demands, then that's what the private employment market is there to provide. And so I think I see these as complementary approaches. Of course, there is some form of competition between them, not only symbolically by the message conveyed, but also because the means available for the government may be limited. And in this regard, the job guarantee program may be more affordable rather than less, because although it may pay more, it will pay a wage rather than just a basic income. That wage is for doing something that has enormous positive externalities for society. Now, of course, the unremunerated and unrecognized work done mostly by women within households or within communities also has important positive externalities and therefore should be fundable. So to a large extent, the two debates are very similar, I think, but we cannot improvise here a full assessment of the different parameters of this debate.
Such a compelling set of themes, and one senses that this discussion could just go on. I've seen a last hand go up and down, and if there's a down, I suspect it's because of a sense that we have just opened such a rich conversation. And so please allow me to express my profound gratitude on behalf of the Democratizing Work team, to you, Olivier De Schutter, to Jean Drez, to Rania Antonopoulos, for really such a compelling and knowledgeable exchange about some of the most crucial issues in our society, and for framing it in ways that will allow this conversation to move forward effectively. So with this, I have to close what has been a remarkable series of 7 webinars, and to do so with my gratitude to the team, and in particular to the indomitable Isabelle Ferreras and the remarkable support of Henriette Lenoir. And we very much look forward to having you join us again in the next iteration. If you have not already done so, please do sign up on the Democratizing Work website, where you can also see recordings of past webinars. So with that, I close this session with gratitude to each of you for your participation. Thank you.